Welcome to the Mortgage Podcast, where we give tactics, strategies, and inspiration to get you to 10 plus loans per month. We talk a lot about how to make a ton of money in mortgage while also being happy and thriving in your personal life. If you want to be a mortgage millionaire, you're in the right place. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Mortgage Podcast with Todd Scrima. I got my lovely executive admin, Veronica, policing me everywhere with all this stuff. She's learning to be a camera tech. It's great. Today, the topic is what happens when things suck. Things suck, and they're really bad. And I'm going to give you hopefully some perspective on this. I think one of my greatest traits is I call myself the honey badger. I just work on stuff until I figure them out. I don't have the quit in me. And so I'm going to try and translate that the best I can. Just to be clear, I still struggle all the time. I'll tell some stories about some times that I had some really hard times. Everyone goes through that. Everybody. You know, I think one of the things that happens is you see this in like famous people, and they're like, oh, this person they just were great right from the beginning. You know, Michael Jordan didn't struggle at all, or, you know, those kind of things. That's the impression we have. Behind every successful person is a super gritty person. And they've learned to deal with hard times better than others, okay? So let me give you some concepts, some ways that I think about it that have helped me. So one is leadership really is what happens when things are bad. When things are good, like for the mortgage people, you know, during COVID, we didn't have any problems. Like we needed some more processors, we needed some more underwriters, but you know, we were taking 40, 50, 60 applications per loan officer per month. You know, like business was great and it covered up a lot of things. But then mortgage went into this time similar to like the financial crisis. I have one image that sticks in my mind in the 2008, 2009 timeframe. So obviously I owned a mortgage banking company. My wife came home with the kids. My kids were little back then. And I remember I was sitting on an ottoman. I had a big screen TV in the living room, and I was just sitting like this. And they came through the front door, so I looked over. She took one look at me, and I guess I was just pale white, and she says, "What's wrong?" And I said, well, the U.S. government took over Fannie Mae today, and I don't know if I have a business. And that's really how I felt in that moment. And as it turned out, 71% of mortgage companies went out of business. And we thrived. Now, we didn't thrive right away. It was about 2008 was really rough. About 6-9 months of this, like, wow, what the heck? But we were able to operate. We were able to do loans. 2009, we're like, whoa, all these competitors are gone. Look at this landscape. Like, this is going to be awesome. And we went on a several-year run that was unbelievable. So that's an example, but in sitting on that ottoman that day, I was scared as hell. And I really meant what I said. I didn't know if I was going to have a company week to week. So my point is that when things are really hard, that's when leaders show up. And it's not easy because everyone's looking at you, right? Everyone's watching you. And as a leader, you have to pick a path, and you have to be confident in your decision. And you have to also know that your decision might be wrong, but making no decision is rarely the right thing. I think the other thing that comes to mind is, what do I want the company to stand for, right? And sometimes tell people this is an at-will job, meaning that we choose to do this. We get to do this. And if it ever comes where you really just don't want to do it, then you don't have to do it, right? We all have free will. And so that does run through my head. I chose to do this, whatever this is. I chose to put myself in this position. Or circumstances happen outside of my control that I couldn't really control, and I got to recognize that as well. So here are a couple more principles. There's no perfect solution. There's just not. If you can find a solution and you think it'll solve 70% of the problem, let's take action. But it's not going to solve 100%. It just won't. And so this idea of perfectionism and decision-making is a fallacy. we're trying to make the best decision for the moment at hand that solves 60, 70% of the problem. And if you can use that as a filter, I think that will really help, okay? Leadership is really tested when things get really screwed up. And so we got to remember, hey, I'm the rock. People are looking to me for decision making, and you got to make some decisions. I'm not a victim. I chose to do this. I get to do this. And I can't be this fragile leader. I got to be the anti-fragile leader. That doesn't always mean that you have to pretend like you have all the answers. I say all the time, hey, I don't know the answer to that, okay? But let's figure it out. And that's fine, okay? But you got to have some sort of plan, okay? Now, this last one is, I think, probably going to rock your world a little bit because it's so counterintuitive. And that is, the only way to grow through things is actually less control. And it's very counterintuitive. I'm a high D on a DISC test, so I want to control everything. And I constantly have to hold myself back from trying to act that way because it doesn't really work. And so accepting that there's a certain amount of uncertainty in whatever you're dealing with is factual, usually, right? I'm not sure what's going to, it's like when a client asks you what interest rates are going to do, like, if I knew that, I probably wouldn't be working, right? So there is ambiguity and uncertainty in all this. In other words, you got to have kind of that healthy relationship to realize, hey, we're going to do this and it may not work. And that's okay. But it's counterintuitive to how most of us think, okay? We don't control many things. Yeah, I always think about it. We control how we think, the actions we take, what we say, how the stories we tell ourselves. Like, there's not a lot of things that we control. So if you think about it, we're not in control from the get-go. So actually giving up more control and realizing that things are going to be free-flowing and things are going to be ambiguous is part of it. Not taking a stance or not taking any action is also not a choice usually. So we have to think about those things. I remember back in 1993, I was, maybe 9 months in as a loan officer, and I closed one loan. And I went home that night, and I'm like, let me get this straight. I worked about 200 hours, and I made one commission, one output. I produced one output in 200 hours. I suck. Like, there's definitely something wrong. This is me going through self-leadership. So there was ambiguity. I didn't know what I was doing wrong. So I met with 3 people. And I said, hey, here's what I'm doing every single day. What am I doing wrong? Because there's definitely something wrong. And I got some of the best advice I ever had in my life. In that case, what I discovered is I didn't have a sales plan. I didn't know how many people to call a day and how many people to meet with. And as simple as that is, at that time, it was life-altering for me because I just didn't know until I reached out to some mentors that were way ahead of me or 5 years ahead of me. There was 3 different people I met with, and it became super obvious because they all said the same thing. And so what I didn't do is wallow in it. Like that, from me having that bad month to seeking advice and meeting with 3 people happened the next week. So I didn't wallow in it. I took action. When I started taking action, I didn't really know what the solution was. And it came over a course of 2 weeks of having these meetings that I discovered, oh, this is why my results are poor. And then once I found that out, I put something in place to hold myself accountable every single day. And you know what's funny about that? All the stress of not making enough sales or not knowing how I was going to pay my bills went away. That month, I think I closed 8 loans or 7 loans and originated like 10. So I had proof now, 30 days later, that my new plan was working. And all the stress and self-doubt and all that stuff came off my shoulders. So there's a lot of choices that we all have in life, and it can get really overwhelming when things suck. I watched an interview there's an app called Masterclass. I think it's an app. And it's just a bunch of smart people being interviewed on different subjects. So one of the people was George W. Bush. And I watched, it was like 3 hours long. I watched the whole thing. And he goes through decision after decision after decision. I had forgotten how much stuff that guy had been through in one presidency. Like, it was a ton, okay? And he was very honest. He's like, look, here's what happened. Here's the situation I was in. Here's the action I took. And then he talks about how it played out. And he says, sometimes, hey, I looked like a genius because it really worked out well. Other times it flopped. But I took action. And because that's when leadership is under the spotlight. And this happens with your children. This happens in our jobs. This happens in business. This happens in society. Like, there's no lack of problems. We've been on this earth thousands of years, but we still have problems every single day. Some are bigger than others. And sometimes when the big problems come, we have to have better skills on how to address them and how to overcome them. I don't think it's easy. I wish in a perfect world we didn't have to do it. But last time I looked, we weren't in heaven yet. And so we have to go through these things. It's what makes us who we are. And how we treat those critical situations is really the determinant, I think, of the meaning of life and how we feel about our lives. So, which is kind of double thing. Like, Todd, we have to enjoy and relish and go for these hard times because it's what makes everything better. Yes, that's what I'm saying. So, in an odd way, the more hard stuff you go through, the better your life's going to be. Now, swallow that one. That's crazy. Crazy. I'll tell you one story in closing. I have a family member, and unfortunately, she went through some really hard, I'm talking hard times. I'm talking heavy drug addiction with heavy drugs. I'm talking going to prison 3 times. Estranged from her children. Bad situation. And this wasn't a couple years. This is like 30 years. Bad. She shows up at one of her kids' homes one day. And the kid saw her and slammed the door in her face. She knocked again. And she said, I just want to see my grandson, and I won't screw up this time. It took them 3 more years to repair their relationship. And she actually did that with each of her 4 children. Now, fast forward today. I know, been sober 20 years. One of the most delightful people I've ever met. One of the most grounded people I've ever met. And I was talking to her not long ago. And she said, Todd, I'm actually glad I went through all that. Because if I didn't go through that dark time, I wouldn't be the person I am today. Now, that's a rough one. You're literally saying that you would go through those 30 years of super brutal times again. Isn't that odd? It makes us think. I was listening to Ed Milet. He had a guy that was burned in the war, 80% of his body. 110 surgeries, I think he said. He said, best thing that ever happened to me. I don't want to go through it again, but what it gave me. And so those kind of stories kind of prove the main point. What happens when we go through the suck is a big part of what our lives look like in the future. We don't control the future, we only control the present. And so by taking action in the present, by learning faster in the present, by taking more action in the present, that's what's going to get us to the good stuff instead of being frozen. So I hope that helps. It's kind of a perspective talk. Maybe you think I'm crazy. That's okay too. If you think it will help someone who's going through something in their business life or their personal life or with their children, maybe send it to them. Maybe it gives them a little perspective. I would deeply appreciate it, and I hope it helps.